Oh
Or
crap!
was
You
I
guys
supposed to
can.
laugh?
I don't know. I, I thought my mic
I was
was
still messing with the
dying
earbud.
again. Oh no! I
So
just
welcome one.
welcome everybody to the
Well,
show. Sorry we're late.
so welcome to the show. This is Inside Movies Galore, episode number 20. And my name is David Streggy. I run Movie Milwaukee, as well as this. And here on the show today,
Bye.
a guest who may become, we don't know yet. So why don't we say hi to her? Hi, Michelle.
Hi Michelle.
Hi, everyone.
Some enthusiasm, people.
From what I
Thank you
understand,
for inviting me on.
most definitely, and you can definitely hang with us whenever we can get us on the air. So so
It's the challenge.
I tasked the group to watch.
We watched Helter Skelter.
The reason why is because Manson had recently died, and I wanted to at least a film that he was at least about him. Michelle, what did you think of the film? Was this your first time viewing it?
No, I had watched it prior, but it was like a long, long time ago. So I did watch it again. But also, before I watched it once the other day too, and then I watched part of it, and then I was going to finish watching it, but I just watched the whole thing again today. But I also spoke with my mother, and that was an era where she was, very much, alive and kicking and doing a lot of things, and there was a lot of different cult activity that was going on in the time. So I got a little bit of insight from her also into the whole, the way everything came out, with the way the song came out, and then the whole kind of putting the spin on that he was hearing the directions from the devil in the lyrics or something. And so then hearing about it, kind of like asking questions, and then I did a little bit of research on everything, and then watching the movie. You sit there and you watch, and I can't even imagine why these people would just follow him blindly and go kill people. And I don't understand. Crazy, I suppose, is what it is. But yeah, it's just kind of mind-blowing. And then at that time frame, there were so many cults. It was like a normal thing, not necessarily a good thing, but it was very normal for that time. But it was just a cult that went completely awry. And I don't get the whole why they would follow him. He was a nut. When you see somebody like that, and most of us sane people would run, run, not walk away.
Well, I did have so I did have kind of an insight into that. So was was the way that the actor portrayed him, was that accurate to like how he was like at the trial? Like, is that stuff he really
Yeah.
said and did?
Yes, yes, it was. I had seen this case on. It was a famous. I think it was '94. It was a documentary that Diane Sawyer did, and she and the documentarians, they described everything that happened in this film, as far as like him lunging at the judges, and like he was that wide-eyed and crazy, and he would like deliberately stare at certain people in the room to make them uncomfortable, and would rehearse exactly what the girls were going to say each day and things like that.
Okay, so then because during some of the scenes when he was doing like his speeches like up on the bench, like this person is clearly insane, but at the same time like he had a lot of conviction and like force behind it. It was almost very charismatic, and it's like, oh, I can see how somebody could be brainwashed into worshiping this person.
Well, to Steve Railsback for putting on a phenomenal performance, even though this relatively rather slow. It's like you almost had to be like smoking at least a little bit of substance watching this film.
Yeah, it was a pretty big slog.
Although
But
he
I
clearly
actually thought
did
that
his,
Steve Railsback
yeah, he clearly did
on
his
a
research.
relatively of the portrayal of Brandon think of the film back when you but
Yeah, I didn't get to see my DVD copy of it because of time constraints, but I was first introduced to it when I was 5 years old on a black and white TV. And my father liked to apparently traumatize me when I was young because I remember also watching The Shining when I was extremely young. And hating any type of horror or nastiness in movies up until my upper teens because of it. And I remember that just looking at the way the actor portrayed it, just the look in the eyes, it just haunted me as a child. I watched it again in college. They were trying to analyze it, but I slept through a lot of that.
I can see why. It's like freaking Lord of the Rings movie. So
but
long.
but still, I mean, to me, I thought it was very well done. I haven't seen the new one that they released, but they have quite a bit to live up to with that one. Of course, y'all
definitely
heard
probably
about him
see that.
leaving his estate to his pen pal, and the man has like $400,000 or more in money to leave, and of course his name apparently, which can be made money off of by his by the person who got his estate. So that's an interesting.
It's kind of a
I
crazy
didn't
twist.
realize, and I didn't
Yeah.
realize until I watched a documentary on serial killer that some of the things in prison, like he would actually make tarantulas out of human hair, and that was just creepy. So,
What?
in
I think
any case,
most things were creepy that he was associated with.
but Dane, why don't you give us a play of what you thought this film?
Well, it's definitely one of those definitive, which Charles Manson wasn't really a serial killer per se, but I mean, he often gets mistakenly lumped into that category. But it was probably one of the definitive movies about a notorious person that I've seen. It was very slow paced and very long, but very well done. I think factually they were right on. Steve Railsback, I thought he was phenomenal as Charles Manson. He really did his homework, looked like him, had the same kind of quasi spiritual convictions that he had, and all that stuff. So it was really, it did justice to the truthfulness of the events. It wasn't as graphic as I was expecting, as I would in my head, as I would expect those scenes to be portrayed, but it was also 1976 on television too, so they couldn't have gotten away with a whole lot. But yeah, I thought it did.
It what?
It what?
Dun, dun,
And I've
dun.
Did he die? What happened?
You cut out
yeah,
for a moment, so
yeah, but bottom line is, I feel like it did a lot of justice to the reality of the case, and it's something I've researched quite a bit, and I felt like they were truthful.
Okay.
okay. So what did you find out about the times that were going on, Michelle?
Just in that time frame it was like the time of the cults, the rise of the cults. There was also the rise of the serial killer, and I kind of disagree. He was a serial killer. He just didn't do it himself. He had other people do it, but it was multiple killings, so that therefore it becomes a serial killer.
Well, technically, that's not necessarily true, because serial killers generally, their pattern is they have a specific type of person that they
Yeah, but he still
follow.
killed multiple people. I mean, he was only convicted for 7 murders. He is, I think it was like upwards of 35 that they believe he actually had a hand in people's deaths, and that he did kill people himself, but he wasn't convicted for those. But
Yeah.
just killing multiple people, it's the very definition of a serial killer. It's just one without pattern,
Yeah, well, there
which is
are
like,
the only person that could conceivably fit that model would be someone like Richard Ramirez, who I don't think had a particular type that he went after. Generally speaking, serial killers have a specific type that they go after, and they do it alone, generally speaking. But and obviously, mass murderers are the ones who kill a lot of people in one sitting, pretty much. And so, in his case, in Manson's case, he just orchestrated his followers to kill specific people, but yeah, with no pattern. So that's why I distinguish.
I still think of it as, because it was still multiple killings, and a lot were in the same way. And then he had with the blood writing, that was like his like signature that he started throwing on, and that is serial killer-ish type of behavior. Even though his goal was to start a race war,
I would
Which
agree.
is pretty
it
much
was
what it
I would
became.
agree with that assessment that he could be considered a
That was
serial killer because he was involved in too many incidents to really like disqualify him from that. I mean, yeah, he didn't
you
do
have
it
to remember.
himself, supposedly. I don't know. I know basically nothing about this case beyond like rumors and like a few things here and there. Um, so
You have to
that's kind of
Yeah,
a disclosure moment.
I
remember
researched it.
that this
I knew it
was.
quite a bit, and
You have to remember that this was a time when the Black Panthers were on the rise, which was another, which is kind of similar to the Black Lives Matter group that has risen up in the political times of this day. So you have to. I mean, that's kind of why even though this film is dated, it resonates of the period times that we are in now.
What?
I mean,
Oh, history
moments in
repeats.
history
Maybe.
you had.
Right. Dave's mic just
Well,
malfunctioned, I guess. So pretend you didn't hear any of that.
Well,
Um,
history repeats itself, and that is the. I think that's really the lesson that you can take from it. Is when we look at a piece like this, it's a slice in time. It's a slice in culture. But these things, they come back. With history, you learn from it or you repeat it. That's the lesson that any piece can tell you.
most definitely. So, is the now watching the film? Anything else that anyone else gained from it?
well, one thing that they emphasized a lot that the Diane Sawyer documentary did not, for whatever reason, was they kept referring to Charles Manson as like a second Jesus Christ. And I've heard that comparison before, and it's just interesting the fact that you had these two people at two very different, very divisive times in history in their respective places who gained followers who were kind of the dreg, who are either lost or misguided or of the dregs of society of their time, to follow them. And in Charles Manson's case, initially there was some kind of vague notion of peace and love, but it was all about him, all about his quest for power, really, and mirroring of him. And with Jesus, we all know about the Beatitudes and that sort of stuff. And there's some uh, instances of like, I've come to bring, to bring a sword and to turn brother against son and that kind of stuff. But it's there's some parallels, but obviously their fates are very different. What they left in their wake is very different. It just I find that comparison to be always very interesting.
well,
Um,
Manson made that comparison himself. He called himself
of
Jesus
course,
Christ.
and
and
So
he
that's
got
really where
people
it
to
came
believe it.
from.
Yeah.
That's where it really came from. He was the one saying, "I'm Jesus Christ reborn," and glorifying himself.
Which
Well,
was
and that's
actually
Probably because he did have a horrible childhood and past. And so, but I don't know how this man, looking the way he did, was able to control so many
well,
women and
he
so many
was
men. I just,
one of the
it boggles the mind.
one of the points that the one of the points that the Diane Sawyer documentary went
Go ahead.
into, which this did not go into as much, probably because they didn't feel like they needed to, because the thing was 1976, so it wasn't that long ago, but was the fact that San Francisco and California in the late 60s was this place where the hippie movement was founded and where all these young people were growing their hair out and letting loose and experimenting and all that. And then in the later part of the decade, you had apparently more drug involved people settling into Haight Ashbury and these various other places where hippies congregated, and that resulted in a lot more like violence and paranoia and other kinds of drugs that induced violence and paranoia were coming onto the scene. And so it's kind of in those kind of clashing of those two influences, plus obviously the divisiveness in the culture, where someone like Charles Manson, who apparently in prison excelled in a power of positive thinking class. Um, yeah, he did, and had quite the way with he had quite a way with the ladies, and used those skills plus just the way the world was turning at that moment. Use those skills to his advantage.
That was probably his key motivation. At least that's kind of what they implied in a couple scenes where they were like questioning the family about like what he would do. It's kind of like, I
But
wonder.
they also stated that he was bisexual, so he did not really care. He would manipulate men, women. It doesn't matter. And the one thing they didn't touch on in the film at all was another motive, that he was turned down by music executives for putting out songs, that the Beach Boys had been bringing him into the music scene and introducing him to producers and stuff, so that
Yeah. Which
that
I and
house
I
the
wish that
house where
they
Sharon Tate was in was where this I can't so it was, I looked it up earlier and I've like the name is slipping in my head of he used to live in this house a year prior, and when they
Oh,
went to this house they were just told to kill everybody in it. They weren't told specifically who was in it, just to kill everybody in it. So there was thought that he thought maybe that this guy was still living there, and that was actually his true intention with this first
really?
murder. And it went wrong. So then he just kind of changed it up and decided, let's keep doing this. Let's just keep killing random people. I mean, they went to the house across the street the next day.
yeah.
So
Well, okay. So
which means
there is a bit of a trade off, though. I have
Pretty
to say
interesting. I
with
didn't know that.
there's a bit of a trade off because unfortunately, the only Manson song that I heard was at the very end when he's singing his song "Garbage Dump," and you can barely hear it. But at the same time,
That
you
was him?
actually, yeah. Well, Dustin, he had an album that got released in 1970 called "Lie," the Love and what was it called? The Love and Lie, the Love and Terror Cult, and it was put out by
Mhm.
like an independent label. Um, with I think the idea was to try and raise money for the defense, and then what ended up happening is that the record was the proceeds for it because he couldn't get money from it from being in prison. So the proceeds went to benefiting the victims of violent crime. So some good did come out of his music being out there, and if you've actually listened to his music, it's actually pretty darn good. You'd be surprised.
oh, I
Huh.
found
well, at least
the name of that record producer was Terry Melcher.
Yeah, but the
yep.
thing is that yeah, he tried to get his music recorded with the Beach Boys because they were connected through the various girls that they were hooking up with at the time, and
And
that's
they
how they
actually
got.
did put out some of his music.
Yeah, well, they did get
And
some.
they
This
also put out several of his ramblings records as well.
Yeah, and but well, the trade-off I was speaking to is that you only get to hear that one song of his, but at the same time, you do get to hear a lot of Beatles songs from the White Album. They're not the original versions; they're covers unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it was nice.
Well, they do that. They do that for royalty reasons. They couldn't probably afford to
Well,
pay
yeah,
the
but
money to use the real songs. So
obviously not. But at the same time, it was less expensive than it would have been if you tried to do that today, where the rights for those songs are just astronomically expensive, and they would have been expensive even back then. But the point is, you at least got to hear these songs in some form that you don't normally get to hear in movies, and these ones that were directly relevant to the case. So I was like, okay, that's good at least. I know that you can use Manson's own music a lot easier than you obviously could use the Beatles. Um, I don't know what the legality of any of that stuff is now that he's dead, and I don't know what all that is, but a lot of people have subsequently covered Manson's songs.
Obviously, the Beatles were influenced by Manson and his culture. That the song "Helter Skelter" came from the whole ensemble.
I only remember
Manson was
Helter Skelter
influenced.
from like that Ozzy Osbourne thing where he just uses it in the chorus.
You mean Manson was influenced by the Beatles?
Manson was influenced. Beatles song came out
Yeah,
first.
that's what I was trying to
The
say.
White Album was out first.
Yeah, the way David was saying it, he implied the opposite, and that's not true. A lot of people have subsequently been inspired by Manson, but uh,
Oh damn it!
So,
So most people are influenced by the Beatles musically, not to go and murder people.
yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of
very true.
Well, and the White Album is actually my favorite Beatles album as well, so we have that much in common.
it's not really my thing, so I can't. Yeah, Beatles. I guess they're a thing.
I grew up on the Beatles. I was a Beatles baby, so
Yeah.
I probably know the words to every single song.
I could probably
In
sing
that,
most Korn songs.
what did everyone think of Sadie's role in the film?
Which one was she? Was she the girl who testified?
Linda Kasabian, yeah.
Um, like a lot of the characters to me were kind of interchangeable. I think I just kind of zoned out a little bit because with a 3-hour runtime, like it kind of got fuzzy who was who. But I remembered her, and she was fairly haunting on the stand. Like she was really convincing in what she did with the role.
You should
And
definitely
Well, and the thing
it's a good thing somebody spoke up too, because goddamn, like
Yeah.
just hearing about it. Ugh.
you should definitely watch the Diane Sawyer documentary, because you get to hear from, this would have been 94, but you get to hear from Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, or Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten. You get to hear from all of them after having spent, at that time, would have been like 25 years in prison. And the fact that the girls are all remorseful for what they did, even though they know that they deserve every amount of punishment that they have gotten. And then Manson, of course, is completely unremorseful and just bad, just absolutely insane.
It's just like frothing at the mouth the whole time.
Pretty much. And he's actually even, you think that Steve Railsback was, I mean, for as good as he was in the role, you look at the way Manson really acted, he was 10 times worse.
Wow. Wow.
Well, you had to think that there were a lot of people in that courtroom that were probably so morally against him because of how much he had inspired, because that's literally how he talked. He was always saying Whitey gonna war against Blackie.
Yeah, that's pretty weird.
That's where he came from. His Well, he was born in Ohio, but his one of his primary influences when he was a kid was a mountain man, like a former someone from the forget where it was, Tennessee or wherever. But somebody who clearly had a lot of Confederate roots, and so you had that plus his idolization of Hitler and all that stuff, and so you get a lot of these very like anti-Semitic, African American statements coming out of him.
Yeah, that was some
So,
really like I didn't really understand his plan. Like, so we're gonna start a race war by killing random-ish people?
Well,
I was confused.
It was
it's not that
random rich white people.
the idea
And
was to try and pin
Mhm.
it on African Americans who were becoming militarized in some form, with the Black Panthers and just with the general chaos that going on in the country. The idea to try and start incentivize these militant black people to rise up and start a race war, and because he, of course, racists always think very heavily in terms of race to such a degree that that kind of stuff matters with literally life and death. And so the
trying to
idea is
think, was this
to
before or
well, the idea was to expedite it so that way, well, after everyone had been killed, more or less, that the family, the Manson family, could come out of the bottomless pit from Revelation and take over what was left of the world, because apparently, according to them, the victorious black man would not be able to know how to rule the world.
Hmm.
You have to understand it as an extraordinarily racist and distorted reading of Revelation. If you know Revelation, like I've read it several times, and if you notice the symbols,
I
you know,
mean, remember the creature with the crowns.
all that, and there's just so much more. But it's a very deliberately distorted, deliberately racist view um, of Revelation.
Well, he was obviously insane, so I guess the plan makes sense in the sense that it's the plan of a crazy person.
Yeah, well,
Like I just
you have
I
to
just
get
don't
in his
quite see
mindset.
I just don't quite see the dots, you know. uh, but
so, Brandon? Do you believe that Charles Manson was in fact a serial killer?
Eh, it's a serial killer, mass murderer. I really think that he has more in common with sort of, he's almost a go between, really, when you think about it. Not quite the level of your mass murderers on his idols level, like Hitler, or even those who would have killed on that level. Though I'm sure he would have if he could have. Uh, but at the same time, there is that sort of narcissism and his own plan. I mean, uh, I there's a more of a personal aspect to it, in my opinion, than it would be for most mass murderers, which I think makes him closer to the serial killer, like an H. Holmes or a
okay.
oh
Fish or Carl Panzam, for that matter.
mhm.
Out of all of them,
But
I really want to learn more about H. Holmes. Like, I wish there was a floor plan for that damn castle. You can't find it anywhere.
it was a pretty good documentary that I watched. H. Holmes, the Serial Killer, which you should definitely check out.
I'm pretty sure I've seen that. Like, I want a map of like
Um,
what the castle was like, and it does not seem to exist from the research I did.
It's in the next Saw movie.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think H. Holmes deliberately did not want plans to exist for the simple reason that only he would know the layout, and I think that's why he had different construction crews working on different parts of the building, so that way nobody but him knew exactly where
Yeah, that
everything was.
was that was the
think
idea.
about it,
So
is
that
kind of similar to like the
he
witch,
had he had kind of
the
two he had kind of two motivations in that. Like a lot of them he just outright stiffed. So it was like, oh, okay. It's like, well, you finish this one room. I'm not going to pay you. It's like, well, we're not working on the other rooms. Great, according to plan.
Well,
Uh,
it's a little bit like with John Wayne Gacy had one of his employees digging tunnels and holes underneath his crawl space, only in the areas that he marked off, so that way he would not accidentally uncover the bodies that he had already buried under the crawl space, which, because the guy followed exactly his directions, he did not discover the bodies under the crawl space. It was only when he was running out of room, and when he invited the police who were watching him, invited them into his house for a steak dinner to try and charm them. And it was only when they noticed the smell coming up out of the air shafts that they realized, oh wait, he's got dead bodies under his crawl space.
And you have
Oh
to
my God.
remember the man had 3 mistresses. So
It's really interesting
Go
the
ahead.
perspective on this, because like I love stuff like this. Like I love horror movies. Like I love Leatherface and Jason and just every like slasher and thing out there. But when it comes to true crime, like it makes you feel kind of queasy.
It's
Like knowing
funny
it
because
really happened.
I can't get enough of serial killers. I research them all the time. I watch a lot of documentaries, research. I don't know. I just find it interesting because I feel like if we turn away from these kinds of people, it's like what they said in the beginning of this film. If we turn away from these kinds of people and ignore the fact that they exist in our society, and or that any one of us could conceivably get there if we were pushed far enough, then if we keep doing that, then we are doing ourselves as a society, we're doing ourselves a terrific disservice, because we continue to not analyze the roots of these problems and why evil exists in the world and why people could conceivably get there. We just throw up our hands and say, I don't know. He was just crazy. He was just this and that. And of course, it's never that simple. Just goes back to the basic disease of the human heart.
Yes.
Michelle,
Heart.
what did you now, I know we touched on this a little bit before, but you think that he was a serial killer?
I do. I mean, because to me, the definition of a serial killer is being responsible for multiple murders, and that that they have that they keep repeating their killing, and not all serial killers get caught. I mean, they're I'm trying to remember which one it's a. Oh, God,
Zodiac.
because I was watching the American, it was the Zodiac Killer. I'm watching that stuff, and then there was the one on Jack the Ripper, that he might actually be an American serial killer. And when you look at some of these, especially a long time ago, they didn't have any kind of way of doing forensics like they do now. People got away with it, and they could get away with maybe 1, 2, 30, 100, 200, 300, 1,000 murders, and nobody would really even know.
Yeah, they not only did they not have the forensic stuff that they have now, but sometimes it was just laziness, or it was just asking questions to witnesses in a not consistent or a just poor way. So
Or
some
just
of it,
not even finding bodies,
yeah,
not knowing where to
Yeah,
look, where people were
you guys
come up
remember?
missing.
so some of
You guys
it
remember that
was
scene in From Hell? It's like when you find them in the river, the cause of death is drowning.
yeah. So
It's
some of
possible
it
he's
is
dead before he
some
went in
of
the
it
river.
is forensic lack of technology. Some of it's just plain human error.
Or maybe that was Sleepy Hollow.
Well, it's also about class. I mean, you got to keep in mind, back in those days, your wealth and influence dictated the amount of attention that went to your cases. Um, so, I mean,
And it really
most poor
did.
people could disappear
Your
off the
social
street and not
standing.
be noticed.
Well, and it's not only class, but also this is kind of a universal thing in terms of like the birth of policing as we know it. Is the idea of too often the police will. This is I don't want this to sound like too much of a blanket statement, but it is the temptation to wrap things up in a very easy to explain bow is great. Like in the beginning of this movie, you said them say, "Oh, it was just they were looking for drugs and stuff like that." So the temptation to kind of look down upon the lesser of society for like a simple explanation is great. And then of course, the more you unwind the yarn, the crazier and crazier it gets, and that just tells you that human beings are rarely simple. and their motivations are rarely simple. It always stems back to some larger thing. In this case, it is just a much more profound disease of the human heart. Like I was saying, just this willingness to be led and this deep desire to control at the expense of human life and dignity.
Most definitely. To think that you can start out with just a very small group of people and it'd be like this personality and get these of his to do exactly as he had asked them to do. But it's own, and I think that's why people are so in story because of his influence and because it was a widely sensational thing. It ended up in the news media, and it even had a mistrial. So ultimately, this film was a play-by-play of the events involved. But like earlier, the one thing that they seem to say over and over was that he called himself Jesus Christ. I remember another like person, David Koresh, also called himself Christ with his Branch Davidians.
So. Yeah, that's the thing you find with cults is that they are, and that's why Charles Manson was so particularly dangerous, because not only did he order for killings, but he was a cult leader. And what is a cult? It's where you have a group of people following the dictates of one person or one authority figure that his or her word goes just absolutely, and with no other real room for outside opinions or outside influence. And they're usually very paranoid and very always jockeying for control and all that stuff. So you had this really dangerous combination. And similarly, another cult leader, not a serial killer, but Jim Jones. Same kind of thing. Political, religious, bizarre, ego-driven ideology, all intertwined together, resulting in in that case, mass suicide, but also murder as well. There's all kinds of cult organizations that have done absolutely abominable things to their followers under the guise of providing them with a better life.
Honor is the truth. Without either, you're both in trouble. So they've lost that. I haven't lost mine. I just haven't surrendered. I'm standing here in 1944. They said the war's over, but I don't believe it. It was over. No one that was in the truth told me it was over. All the liars went down the road and said it was over, but no one that I knew that was telling me the truth said it was over. So I guess it's not over as far as I'm concerned.
In any case, have anything else to add?
I have a couple things. Well, first of all, this was the first time I saw it today, and I just thought it was kind of long. Like it was interesting for a while, but I kind of like checked out as it went. But like the trial scenes where there were just bursts of activity, like his like ravings and like the family like being on the stand and some of the flashbacks, like there was just enough of that to keep you engaged, at least for a little while. But the cut I saw was 3 hours long, and so that was a challenge. But anyway,
Definitely intense because
I had to take breaks.
It was slow mo.
yeah, I couldn't afford to take breaks, so I just kept like slogging. I had programming homework though, so it was okay. Did anybody think that the narration that they had going on, did that remind anyone else of The Town That Dreaded Sundown? Like that voiceover guy that would come on?
It did just a little bit. And the other thing that I noticed is that the trial lawyer Charles Manson, father of Marty's father in Back to the Future.
Oh,
Really? Neat.
it. I thought the narration reminded me a
But,
little bit of like if Roger Sterling did Law and Order.
I was thinking
That was exactly the same thing I was thinking too. It was a very Rod Serling-esque, especially the very
like
beginning and the very end.
Twilight Zone.
Yes.
Almost.
I was pretty sure that's who we were talking about, but it's been a long time.
In any case,
I did have another thing about it, like when after the girls like shave their heads and they're like on the stand, like you blind stupid people. Ah! That did solve kind of a mystery for me. Is last time I did weightlifting, like I was listening to a lot of music by this guy called Brendel, and he has sound clips in like some of his techno songs. And he used those lines, and it's like, oh, that's where that's from. I thought that was like a clip or something. But
If you listen to
something useful.
White Zombie,
I
there's a lot.
use that too.
Yeah, there are a lot of sound clips that are taken from that Diane Sawyer documentary that I mentioned. I think it's on Astro Creep, if I'm not mistaken. That's where that.
They really like stuff from Night of the Living Dead on that.
Well, it's because it's public domain.
Well, and because Rob Zombie is Rob Zombie and can't help himself.
well, in any case, did anyone else have anything else to say about this?
It's less of a horror movie than a docudrama. Like, don't go in expecting to have fun.
Did you enjoy? Did anyone enjoy watching it?
I did.
I was pleased that it was accurate to everything that I had read, and was well executed.
Don't show it to your 5-year-old.
Well, I don't know. The action was pretty tame. Like it was long. I mean, I'm happy I saw it, so I can say I saw it, but I didn't necessarily enjoy myself. Mostly just because of the length. Like, I don't know how you guys were able to like get out of jail free with a 2-hour cut of this thing. But
I didn't know there was a 2-hour cut. I wouldn't have watched it anyways. I want to watch the full thing. If I'm going to watch it, I'm going
I watched the
to
full
watch
thing.
it.
well,
this is just what I got on DVD, so.
Well, it makes me wonder, like, why did they cut that hour then? Like, because it was fairly, like, everything was clearly important. There was nothing that you could cut, but it's like, wait, there's a 2-hour thing? Huh? It was so
Yeah,
confusing.
I can't even imagine what they would take out because the whole thing built up the entire story. So I can't see what you would cut out. I mean, it seems like I know when they did the movie, the original one, there's a lot of stuff they couldn't really go fully into and they kind of had to gloss over. So I can't even imagine shortening it even more.
Well, and let's also not forget that this was not the first or the last movie made about the murders. You know, there was a
Family.
The Family. There was a movie from, I think it was.
I have a movie called The Manson Family, like, on my shelf over there. I haven't seen it yet.
Well, there was a movie from, I want to say, 1969, I think. It was one of the first ones. It was called the Helter Skelter Murders. It was shot in black and white, and while the trial was still going on, so they didn't even know what the end of the story was.
Actually, that'd be kind of neat to have just because of the significance of it all.
A movie made not too long ago that ended up having from it. There was the 2004 remake of this particular.
Which that version I would like to see because it actually is told from Linda Kasabian's point of view, which I would personally possibly find even more interesting just because with the serial killer documentaries I watch, I tend to not like and not watch the ones that are from the police investigation perspective just because it's so kind of boring to me. I much prefer actually learning about the lives of the killers themselves and hearing from the people who knew them personally and that kind of stuff. my big goal with watching all that stuff is because I want to know some of the common threads for some of these people, and what can then the problem is with those documentaries and with movies like this, they never then take the next step and say, okay, what can we do about it? What can we do to watch for these signs in people? What kind of, if you're have a child that exhibits these traits, how can you get them counseling? How can you help them? There's only one documentary, an Australian one, about Peter Dupas that I saw that at all touched upon those kinds of actions, and that's sorely missing in the United States. If we don't think about solutions to these problems, then they'll just keep happening, and we'll just keep uh, getting to the crime scenes with the camera footage just eating up the suffering, and then not thinking about ways to actually prevent it from happening.
Well, I see children in my practice that bear a lot of signs when you go to antisocial personalities that just lead towards that, and
Mm-hmm.
you have to worry if some of these people do not get help or the help that they need. And the way that we typically deal with it in the mental health system is if they misbehave, oh, just lock them in the hospital where they learn from even more people like them or to do negative things. And this is a sad thing that our system has.
And some can't afford the help that's needed. So a lot of times, and adults are often thrown back into the system, and they can get pitted against
Well, it's
the
just
other people who are
it's just
struggling.
recidivism, and it's not actually solving the problem. It's just, you messed up, or you did something wrong, or you committed a crime. Okay, we'll throw you in there for however long, and then we won't actually work on solving your personal problems or fixing whatever conditions made you do this in the first place. Just poof, out you go, repeat the same crime.
Well, medicate them
It's
first usually, but yes.
Well, you know what I mean. It's like
Yeah.
here's a but there is hope though out there. There was this not a serial killer, but there was this documentary that I've told David before that I want us to watch. It's called an HBO documentary. It's only a half hour, called Child of Rage, and it's about a young girl who was severely neglected as a infant, and as such grew up with like a, forget the exact name of the disorder, but it's where she had absolutely no sense of empathy towards anyone whatsoever, which resulted in her doing unspeakable acts of sadism and torture of physical and sexual kinds towards her brother and her family and animals and stuff. But and this is all real. It was all from the actual therapy sessions.
Hmm.
And but then she was able to get help in this special like a kind of almost like a retreat, like a therapeutic retreat. And apparently after it was all done, that she was healed more or less, and did not commit any more acts of torture or anything like that. um, but the bottom line is, if you have people that have antisocial, personalities, or have problems early on, if you get them help early enough and give them an environment in which they can be loved and nurtured, then in fact that might be the way to solving these things, and to not
Hmm.
produce the next Charles Manson.
That vaguely reminds me of I've been watching Masters of Horror, and that reminds me a little bit of Dario Argento's episode Jennifer,
Oh yes.
with like the wild
Yes.
creature woman.
Yeah. Well, but it's just like I go on a soapbox about this because like it matters a lot to me in general, but it especially matters when it's from a child, because too often it seems like we in our society only care after it's already too late. We don't care about when
And
the first signs happen.
Correct.
if some of these people are just born, born with
Well,
the intent for evil.
I personally don't subscribe to the notion that someone is necessarily born bad, but I do think that there's a lot of genetic evidence to suggest that certain people might be predisposed to certain like addictions or tendencies or whatever, just based on who their families are, doesn't excuse their actions, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they will necessarily be the way that some people in their family are. You can be predisposed to being an alcoholic, but that doesn't mean you'll be an alcoholic necessarily. It just means that that's something to watch out for.
Yeah,
I'm
and
just going to touch
that's how biology
on the.
kind of bears out too. Um, I don't think they have good numbers for humans because experiments on humans, I guess, are distasteful or something. But it's not. I don't think it's quite like 50-50. I think it's something like 60-40 and up. But
Mhm.
environment does have a very big influence on how people develop, and
Right.
a very large part of it is genetics too.
Well,
So
I
it's a
definitely
combination of the two factors.
it is, but also like if you live in a single parent household, if like your upbringing shapes you a lot, and that's why like certain individuals or certain groups of people might be more predisposed to committing certain types of crime just based on the tendencies of those kind of determining factors being present in their lives. And it just what really basically it all boils down to having a stable home life of some kind, feeling loved, feeling nurtured, and being given the essential tools with which to succeed in life in such a way that you can feel whole. And it matters a lot to me to talk about these things and to mention that, just because I feel like even if they don't become a serial killer or a mass murderer or a cult leader, if you can just say that and get the word out and just try to prevent these people from becoming criminals, who would be susceptible to that, then that's really important for everyone, but especially for just the simple fact that people that need love and need that kind of healing, that they can get it in some way.
What's interesting that I can say is there's an actual personal experience that I can somewhat mention. I had a friend on a time who was in a relationship with a Mormon. Her mother actually sent a cult preventionalist to get out of this relationship, and the things that I learned from this cult is that I ended up being involved with the situation. The things that he said is that a totalitarian relationship be with just one more than one person. It can be someone between a one-on-one relationship with you and me, or something vice versa. Relationship that he had mentioned was Ike Turner.
Mm-hmm. Well, any
And
kind of yeah, any
from what
kind
I
of
get, I mean, from what I gather, it can happen just between one person and another. It doesn't mass group. It can be one relationship, and you can that person could have power over you and make you do whatever the fuck they want.
Well, it's absolutely the truth. I mean, it's that's where you get the whole idea of a master-slave relationship, or a dominant and submissive, or just any kind of relationship in which one person has undue power over another. And that's why you get authoritarian parents who exercise unbelievable power over their children in a way that's highly destructive, leads to depression and anxiety, low self-esteem, a lot of problems later on in life when the parent, when their word is law practically for no real reason other than they're the parent, then that can cause tremendous destruction.
Fully agree.
But in any case, I think I'm going to wrap this up here. So go around and see what everyone has done. Dane, why don't you tell us what you do and where you're from?
Yep. I am Dane Kyle, independent writer, director, and producer out of Charlotte, North Carolina. You can connect with me on YouTube. My YouTube channel is The Dane Kyle, Keil. And I have had a lot of recent success. I got one of my short films into a horror anthology feature film. I just got the news tonight that the film that I'm currently the most proud of, that it is going to be able to be played on a Roku channel, and well, I don't want to say too much until I've signed the papers, which are going to be sent to me this week. But they'll be played on their Roku channel pretty regularly, as well as be on their video on demand, such that I could get 50% of the profits from whoever downloads it, and
Awesome.
which is really sweet. The film that's going on there, it's one that I didn't ever intend really to be like a moneymaker. Not that this will obviously rake in like $50 million or anything, but point is that I made it from my heart. I made it out of the darkest place of my whole life. And that just tells anybody listening, just tells you that if you can really dig down deep and produce something constructive out of your experience rather than destructive like a Charles Manson would do, then you're left with something that could actually benefit you and benefit others a lot better and can last.
Awesome.
Look forward to seeing that.
And you told me about that earlier, so I congratulate you here.
Yes.
So hopefully it just grows from there. Michelle, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from?
Well, my name's Michelle Yeager. I'm from Yeager Entertainment, model, actress, writer, comedian. You can follow me on Facebook. You can find me either by searching Michelle Yeager or looking up Yeager Entertainment or Yeager Bomb Yeager.
Shit.
Awesome.
Whatever, just kidding.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. From?
Oh, well, I'm from...
Go ahead.
What was that?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm from Detroit, Michigan. So the
Okay.
music capital. I've been involved in the music industry. Well, acting, I've done acting and modeling since the age of 3 years old.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on, and hopefully you enjoy being with us. And hopefully,
Well, thank you for having me.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Hope you get to come back.
Like we did. Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm Brandon Farmer. I go by Septum Sen online. The page I run on YouTube is Septum Sen versus the World. We're a slow-growing media channel that specializes in physical media and collection of physical media. We are in the midst of a transition, of course, into the holidays, and we've got Santa Claus doing reviews for us for December. Already have 2 in the can coming in this week, Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol and Mother Krampus. 2 movies that, of course, are very, very similar in how they're executed, and of course.
Krampus Magoo.
So, of course, again, we always appreciate people checking us out, and we enjoy what we do, so that's all that really matters.
Most definitely. Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Ah, shit. One moment, please.
By Dawn.
Well, hello. Uh, Everybody else was doing stuff with the camera. Ah. Well, I'm Dustin. I go to UWM. I'm currently studying GIS, which is basically making maps with computers. And I collect horror movies and well, anything. So I have an Instagram account for just showing off my stuff because there's so much of it. I mean, why not? That's ER Horror Hunter, all one word. I also occasionally have an eBay store, although it's empty right now. Yeah, I just love coming on and talking about movies, and hopefully we can do something a little bit more light next time.
Next, so what film do we want to do next week, guys?
Well, if you want light, then you definitely don't want to watch Child of Rage, even though it is very short.
Hey, we could do the Krampus movie series. There's a lot of stuff in there. You can just take random ones.
How about
That's
we do
very light and frothy.
if we do a Krampus movie, I want to do the good Krampus, not like knockoff Krampus.
Like the 2015 one?
Yeah, like the real one.
Do we? Well, I'm thinking of two Krampus films. That holiday horror
I've seen
mythology that's out there.
I've
You mean
seen
Christmas Horror Story?
We could do the Krampus one that came out.
The one that was directed by
couple years
the
ago.
director of Trick or Treat.
yeah, Mike Doherty Krampus. Like, I prefer to do that because
Both are great.
I've
I
seen
mean,
the
A Christmas
knockoff
Horror Story
Krampus,
had
and
William
it's pretty
Shatner.
bad. Like,
Let's plan on doing that one then, and then we'll make sure that each of you gets a copy if you don't already have it.
oh, I got it.
Yeah, I have it too.
I have every single one of them.
I have almost every single one of them.
Actually, if you guys get a chance
the only one
to
you
check
need.
out the original Night of the Krampus, that's the original short that they did. Well, I guess it's not the original, but it's one of the ones that originally kicked off the craze. It is a really cool little short film.
Is it online? Do you know?
A lot of the rest of them are just cheesy goodness. Aside from those two that you mentioned. Well, one of them.
Yeah, and Krampus, the Christmas Devil 2 is kind of, but
you don't have to lie. It was bad.
Yeah. But in any case, let's plan on that being next week's film then, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed our talk here, and hopefully we see more coming up. So thank you for coming back, people, and say good night, guys.
Good night. Like, share, and subscribe.
No.
Do it. Do it, goddammit.
Right.
Good night, everyone.